So the third and final test that we'll be seeing in the FluBu lab is the treadmill walk test. Once again, this is just a different kind of test you can use to measure aerobic fitness. The same rule of 85% max heart rate as a termination criteria applies, and the same rule that if ever Clara feels uncomfortable, she feels fatigued, if she's stumbling, she can terminate the test at any point, or I can choose to terminate the test if I feel that things aren't going well. So it's just another variation. This test for the client is probably physically the easiest test for them to complete out of the 3 tests that we'll be seeing within the lab. So once again, if you have a client who's quite unfit or maybe has joint issues, here it's walking only. There's no jogging, so it's easier on the joints. Once again, with the ergocycle test, that one's good for your joints as well, but if the person's not used to being on a bike, they might find it quite difficult, so this might be a more appropriate alternative. If your client, however, is quite fit and quite active, this test might not be the appropriate test to choose because the speed won't get the heart rate in the proper range, and so we might not be getting accurate results. So these are all factors you need to consider when selecting the appropriate aerobic fitness test. The other thing that's unique about this test is that it uses the treadmill, and with it, because Clara will be walking and moving, I won't be able to do palpation. There's no stages where she'll actually be stepping off the treadmill. And so that makes it quite harder. And because of the sound of the motor, it can be quite hard to use auscultation. So for the sake of this FluBu course, it's the only test where we'll allow the use of a heart rate monitor. If you are trying to get your CSEP certification, depending on who your instructor examiner is, they may or may not allow you to use a heart rate monitor for the MCAF test and the ergocycle test as well. But for the sake of the FluBu course, this is the only one, and you'll be using manual methods of heart rate measurement for the other 2 tests. So in that respect, this is also slightly easier for the tester as well, because you just need to read the watch, or sometimes the treadmill will pick up the frequency as well. So Clara's already got her heart rate monitor on. Typically, you want to make sure it's fairly tight. We've got it right under the xiphoid process, underneath the shirt, so she knows that it's comfortable enough. Oftentimes your clients might sweat, so as they're moving around, it might get loose, so you want to make sure it's quite snug. If you have a hard time picking up the frequency, you can also use conductive jelly or a couple of drops of water. You don't need a lot of it, and that can help the transmission of the information from the heart rate monitor to the receiver as well. So without any further delay, this is a 2-stage test. Both 4 minutes. The first stage acts as a warm-up. The second stage is really the working load of the test. Walking throughout, I'm going to be selecting a speed as the tester between 3.4 and 4 miles an hour. Now, I'm going to be using my judgment based on basically my client's athletic profile, the past, how active they are currently. So the screening questions I would have asked in advance. Clara being a varsity athlete, I know she's quite active and quite fit. I'll put her more probably closer to the 4 miles an hour mark, maybe 3.8. And then from there, after the second minute of the test, I might have to adjust it to get her in the range I'm looking for. The range for everyone is between 120 and 150 beats per minute. And so essentially, at the end of the 4-minute warm-up stage, I'm trying to have a steady state heart rate between 120 and 150. That's my goal. The other thing is we need to go through some proper safety. So you might want to ask your client if they've used a treadmill before. A lot of clients don't know this, but you should never close your eyes when you're walking on a treadmill. It's really difficult for your vestibular system to maintain that balance, so you tend to fall over when you close your eyes, even if it's just a walking speed. So I would tell Clara not to do that. And so I'll have Clara step onto the treadmill with her feet on the rails, holding onto the handrails, and I'll start increasing the speed to 3.8 miles an hour. That's the speed I've selected for her, with 0 elevation for this warm-up load. Now, I haven't started my time yet. I would start it once she actually steps on. So now that we're in this position, what I would instruct Clara to do, now that I know that she has used a treadmill before, is to just take her left leg and drag it back so she has an idea of the speed of the carpet. Right? It could be the right leg, but for the sake of the video, we're using the left. Once she feels comfortable enough with that, I can ask her to put both, and I'm going to put my arm back here just for a little support in case she were to stumble or lose her balance. Once she's comfortable with that walking speed, I can instruct her to release the handlebars, and I would start my stopwatch, and the test has now begun. So once again, this is a 4-minute warm-up stage. This is the speed I've selected. Based on her heart rate, I might choose to increase or decrease the speed. So here we see that the watch has the heart rate, and the treadmill's also picked it up as well. And so I'm aiming for 120 to 150. And you'll see it might take a couple of minutes for that heart rate to ramp up to the appropriate workload. Now, without actually going through the entire procedure of the test, let's say the speed is appropriate and I have my target heart rate and it's steady state. Once it's time to get into the working load, the only thing you're going to be changing is the elevation. That's it, and it's okay that the heart rate will then probably climb outside of that 120 to 150 range. That's how the test is supposed to work. So right now we see Clara's heart rate, because she's still in her warm-up stage, is only about 100. She probably won't climb to 120. Right? Even if I put it at 4 miles an hour, this test, she may just be too fit for this appropriate protocol. But let's assume we're at the working load. So you're going to add 5% slope, let your client know ahead of time. All right? And at the end of that warm-up load, you'd also be asking the rate of perceived exertion on a scale of 6 to 20, how they feel. And now she would do another 4 minutes at that speed. All right? Once again, client contact. I'm in a great position to see how she feels, how she's looking. I let her know that she can stop. Clara, you're doing good. She's feeling great. And I would just do this for another 4 minutes. After that, we would move on to the cool down recovery process. Now, let's assume she's done her other 4 minutes and it's time to cool down. How do we get our client off the treadmill? Depending on the speed and the fatigue, it might be difficult for them to just immediately step off the rails. And probably what they want the most is to reduce this slope, because that's really going to be creating potentially some lactic acid in the calf muscles. So when you look at your elevation, and remember it should say 5.0, not 0.5, because that's only a 0.5% slope. We're looking for 5% slope. Let's assume the test is done. I'll immediately decrease the slope to 0 and then decrease the speed. And I'll instruct her that when she's ready to grab onto the handlebars, and then with one leg step on a rail and then the other one, and then she'd be fine. And once again, if she looks like she was weak or stumbling, I would position myself this case to potentially help her from stumbling backwards, etc. And now that she's off, you can just push the stop button and she could step off the treadmill and the test would be done and you would immediately begin your cool down procedure.